So I'd like to welcome all of you to Leaders Connect. Quiet, please. This is not the networking time now. But I do encourage people to take out their cell phones and text and Twitter and do all those good things to let people know about Tom and his book. I used to tell my students to put them away, but in this case, take it out. So I would again like to introduce Tom Meloche. Tom is a very, I guess I think of him as, you know, that old commercial about the most interesting man in the world. Well, here he is, the most interesting man in the world. Except, rather than having hundreds of women, he's only got one woman around him, which is Renee, and that's plenty, right?
That's plenty.
Yeah.
Hi.
Actually, you're pretty lucky to have Renee. Yeah. How did you manage that? So, but he has lots of tech people swarming around him. So I don't think that's a real sexy commercial, though, that here's Tom Meloche, the most interesting man in the world, and there's a bunch of techies swarming around him. It might sell, I don't know, you know, but they're here today, some of his friends. And Tom is one of the founders of Menlo Innovations. He got that going with Rich Sheridan and Jim Goebel and a couple other people.
Bob Sims.
Myself. What was that? Was it like the early 2000s?
We started that in the basement of Richard's house watching the Twin Towers come down.
Okay, that gives you a time. And he has gone on to do lots of consulting around, I guess you'd call it agile. Agile is what I'm not, but agile is it's good. But Tom has been a thought leader in the community. He's been a guy that has really interesting opinions, a little bit of a contrarian, I would say. You know, so but usually ends up being right, which is to my chagrin, because it's like, how did you know Trump was going to win?
It makes you really popular with people.
So it's with great gratitude and enjoyment, looking forward to this, to present Tom.
Thank you. Thank you very much. George is sitting in the front row, George Azrak. And George was a CIO of Domino's Pizza when I first met him. And I have the world's best video of George. He's holding up a folded little piece of paper that we used in a planning ceremony. And George says, "This is magic." You remember that? Today, I didn't understand the nature of the magic back then. But today I'm actually going to share the details of the nature of the magic. And the details are about the ceremony that we created. Ceremony. So I'm going to set us back to give us a little context. It's 1942. Franklin Roosevelt is still President of the United States. Right? News is spread via radio. And the world looks grim. The world has been overrun by the Axis powers, by the Imperial Empire of Japan. The world has been overrun by genocidal dictators. And we're not even at war yet. Fortunately, we've been preparing for war, though. In the early 1930s, the fledgling Boeing company produced this, the Model 299. It's a strategic bomber. We'd never used anything like a strategic bomber before, but the idea was straightforward. The idea was, if we take out the enemy's capability to produce goods during the war, it makes it easier to win the battle. So Boeing was presenting this aircraft on October 20th, 1935. They were presenting this aircraft to the Army Air Corps in a demonstration flight. The future of the company is at stake. It did not turn out well. Unfortunately, on that day, the plane crashed. The two pilots died. And the future of that company, and potentially the free world, was actually in jeopardy, although we didn't know it at the time. A local newspaper published an article, and they said, perhaps this is too much of an aircraft for a man to fly. Too many switches to set for it to fly correctly. This crash occurred because one single switch was not set correctly during the takeoff. The story as it's told, and this is really important, I'm going to keep emphasizing as it's told. The story as it's told is checklists saved the day. The story as it's told is that Boeing invented the checklist, and the checklist had the co-pilot and the pilot together carefully going through each switch for various parts of the flight and getting them in the exact right position so that the plane would not crash and that they would not die. By the way, it worked. Whatever they did was working. The pilots were able to take off this plane. And this plane became one of the most famous aircraft in the history of warfare by the time it came out. The B-17, the Flying Fortress. Over 12,000 of them were produced during the war. And we owe a great debt of gratitude to the young men who flew them. These planes changed the nature of the war, and they saved the free world. That's how the story is told. And as a result, after the war, we had this proliferation of checklists, right? We created whole project management offices to document procedure and build checklists. To this day, one of the best-selling books on the New York Times list was the Checklist Manifesto. And when I go to large corporations and consult, one of the biggest words that shows up when you do a search cloud on how they're using words is checklist. And you watch how people actually use them. Often, project managers filling out checklists after the project is over. So the audit will pass. I work with a lot of banks and insurance companies. The checklists have become a time-wasting, joy-killing machine. We waste billions of dollars each year mindlessly filling out checklists. There's a problem with the way we told the story. It's like going to a wedding and saying, that was a really awesome way to get a ring. Now, if you said that, we might think you'd utterly missed the point. Or maybe you're a gold digger, I don't know. But it's an utterly bad interpretation of a wedding. They saw the wings and they missed the wedding. The innovation that saved the free world, the profound innovation that can change your business, your organization, your family, your church, your non-GO group, your government, is ceremony. It's ceremony. What happened in the cockpit of the B-17 and the Model 299 before it wasn't just filling out a checklist. It was the pilot and the co-pilot in training in a ceremony, emotionally connected, working together. I'm going to parse what a ceremony is for you in a moment. But George really, I didn't know you were going to be here, but George summed it up best. It was about 17 years ago. It's magic. It's magic. So what are the elements of a ceremony? I'm going to hold up 4 fingers. Hold up 4 fingers with me so I'm not the only one looking foolish here. All right, ceremony is 4 key elements. Ceremony has purpose. It's a purposeful work. Ceremony has social ritual. Emphasis on social there. There's more than one person involved. By the way, ritual is very powerful. There's a powerful ritual for taking off an aircraft. My dad was a pilot of Cessnas, right? You would do a checklist in Cessnas. Checklist can still be powerful, especially when it's going to save your life. It is not as powerful as social ritual, more than one person doing it. Third, a ceremony has to be worth the sacrifice. Have you ever attended a meeting at work and you're like, that was a complete waste of time? Here's a clue for you. That was a complete waste of time. That emotional response we're going to talk about next. There's a fourth thing that ceremony must provide: positive emotional energy. Positive emotional energy. So you can write these down. They're on your seat. They're on the sheet that I left on your thing. The very first thing ceremony must provide, right? It must be purposeful. It must be purposeful work. You must actually get work done during the ceremony, right? You actually set the switches if they're set incorrectly during the ceremony. You don't just talk about it would be nice to set the switches. You actually set the switches. Social ritual. You do it together and you're following a ritual. Why is ritual so important? Ritual is so important because after you do it a few times, it's easy to replicate. It's easy to teach. There's a secret about Menlo. How many of you have heard of Menlo before? How many have been there? All right, we'll talk about Menlo later. There's a secret to Menlo. We were actually incredibly lazy managers. The secret is, once you got the teams doing social ritual, you don't have to manage them. Right? It must be worth the sacrifice. The third part about ceremony. If it's not worth the sacrifice, if there isn't a return on investment for this work, for coming together and doing it, why are we doing it? And fourth, and this is so key, I cannot overstate its importance. It must deliver positive emotional energy. So purposeful work, right? It's really straightforward inside of the B-17. The purposeful work is to set the switches and not crash and die. But a lot of everything else you do could be purposeful work and could be done with ceremony, and we just don't think this way. I wrote this book for one fundamental reason on ceremony: to get you to see the profound knowledge that's often buried inside of other business books. Most businesses have stumbled across the secret for doing ceremony for purposeful work, but they haven't found a good way to communicate it. And so you have to sort of pull it out of the book as it's been constructed. It's a way to do purposeful work. Next slide. It's social ritual. Social ritual. So what happens in the B-17? The co-pilot picks up the checklist, right? They're preparing for takeoff. He's like, intercooler switches, neutral. He reads the first item on the checklist, and he reads it out loud. And the second person, the pilot, puts his hand physically on the switch, and he feels the position that it's in, and he calls it out back. Intercooler switch, neutral. Check. On to the next item on the list. It's a very straightforward ceremonial element. It's called call and response. I'm going to do one right now with you to get us a sense of ceremony. I'm going to call out B-17, and you say in response, ceremony. All right, you ready? B-17.
Ceremony.
Good. Louder. B-17.
Ceremony.
The chef needs to hear B-17.
Ceremony.
And Ann Arbor wants to know B-17.
Ceremony.
And one last time for Willow Run Airport that actually has a B-17.
Ceremony.
Call and response. Really, really powerful technique, isn't it? If you've read Joy Inc., you'll see call and response done a lot at Menlo. As you begin to read other books, you'll see call and response, that aspect of social ritual, done again and again. You see it If you watch the movie Apollo 13, Capcom, while they're preparing a rocket for takeoff, calls out to each controller, flight. Flight will say, go for launch. Right? And he'll work his way through, medic, mechanical, each station he'll call out and they'll call back. Why do they do that? Because it really matters. You don't accidentally want flight thinking maybe we shouldn't be launching. But the guy in control presses the button anyway. You actually call it out and responds in social ritual. Here's the trick. Most work you've never thought of as being social ritual could be social ritual. And the social being important. How Zingerman cleans a table, or sets up a table, or waits on somebody, could be social ritual. It is usually solo ritual. And there's a difference. You leave a lot of power behind when you do it only as solo ritual. And we'll talk about what that power is as we go on. Right? George knows, because at Menlo, what did we do? We took computer programmers who normally work alone, one computer programmer, one computer, and we put two of them at a computer, and we made them program in social ritual. And the net result, and we saw it again and again and again, increase in quality, decrease in defects, faster, better, less expensive, the trifecta, because we did it as social ritual. Is ceremony worth the sacrifice? Is the ceremony worth the sacrifice? So whatever you do in your organizations, in your businesses, is it worth the time you invest in it? How many of you ever spend time consulting inside a large company? You were like the CIO in a large company, right? You ever sit in a large meeting when you're consulting for a large company and there's 20 people around the table and you begin to do the mental math of, on average, these people are costing this company $100 an hour. And there's 20 of us around the table and we're in a 2-hour-long meeting, the first of 5, and it's all waste. And you begin to do the math of what the sacrifice of that meeting is actually costing, and you're like, this makes no sense. Is it worth the sacrifice? Is it worth the sacrifice to guarantee that your switches are set correctly on the B-17? Yeah. In fact, it becomes fairly easy to convince them of that. It's not as easy to convince people to pair program. How many have ever done it in the 25 years that we've demonstrated that it's the single most effective way? People have to believe it in order to do the sacrifice. And lastly, positive emotional energy. And this was the one that took me the longest to really appreciate and really understand. The nature of positive emotional energy. Most of who we are is subconscious. And we get a little peek into our subconscious through our emotions. Now, I'm a trained computer engineer, so this emotion stuff doesn't come easy to me. But I have to pay attention to it if I'm going to unleash the power of ceremony. I have to pay attention to my emotional state at the end of a meeting. And more importantly, if I'm hosting a meeting, I have to ask every single person who attend at the end, did that feel like it was worth it to you? Do you feel good?
Yes.
B-17.
Ceremony.
Positive emotional energy. Ceremony, because of positive emotional energy, becomes an activity-reinforcing, emotionally addicting, self-replicating process. I'm going to say that again, because this is like really great sentence that I sluck up here. I probably borrowed it from at least 10 other heads. I read over 50 books to write this one book, and the book, by the way, is really short. It's meant to be read in an hour and a half, because I'm writing for executives and millennials. I'm not sure millennials read it all. I didn't say that, camera. I forgot. On TV.
What Tom meant to say.
What I meant to say is millennials read very judiciously only the most important things. So I spent a lot of time to write them a very, very, very short book. Activity reinforcing, emotionally addicting, self-replicating process. That's self-replicating? That's really powerful. Why is it self-replicating? Well, it's social ritual, and it's giving them positive emotional energy. The team teaches it to new people who come on. You don't have to create an onboarding program. You don't have to create a training program. They just do it. It's how they work together. And as you begin to take your work, more and more of your work, and build an activity reinforcing, emotionally addicting, self-replicating process, what happens is it becomes really easy to hire. Right? There's a really famous book called Good to Great. The book has wonderful advice. It says hire the right person. All right, I like the advice. It's not that that advice is wrong. It's just that it's paralyzing. How do I hire the right person? How do I hire the right head of marketing if I'm the CEO of a company and my degree is in finance? Right? Take them out to dinner, see how they treat the staff. Right? Ask Ari. Were they mean to the waiter? That's a good indicator of like someone's real temperament. Or I have ceremony and I invite them to participate in, and if they can entrain with me in the ceremony, to entrain is to like synchronize your rhythms and your focus and your energy to be pulled along with the other. If they can entrain with me in ceremony, and we built the ceremony to be effective, that we know it works, then I can hire the person. My focus as a manager goes from hiring the right person to building the right ceremony. It's a huge, huge shift. Next slide. So Join Incorporated, most of you are familiar with this. Most of you have probably now been to Menlo, seen it, walked through it. How many of you walked through it and you're like, that was wonderful. There's not a single thing I could do that I saw here. This is crazy talk. But that may be true until you recognize that what you're seeing is ceremony, and that you could actually take some ideas that you saw there and take them back to your next meeting and improve it. And that's what my book, by the way, tells you how to do. So Rich wrote a memoir. It's a wonderful story about how the ceremonies run that build the organization. He just didn't bother to tell you that they turned everything into ceremony. That's what we did. We didn't tell you that because we didn't fully understand it. It was my co-author on the ceremony book, Kyle Arte, who pointed out to me, you know, what you did with programming, you turned it into ceremony. Two people sitting together at a book, run the unit tests on the machine, check out the code, pull down the story card, write a failing test, write the code that passed the test, right? Refactor, does the test pass? Right? Refactor, does the test pass? All of these steps for writing software, we turned into highly structured ritual ceremony that produced extremely high quality software at a fraction of the price. We just didn't actually realize that's what we've done. How we built a workplace people love? We built a workplace where people are involved in ceremony for 20 to 30 hours a week. Emotionally addicting, self-replicating process. Who here worked at Menlo at least once? All right, so those who've worked there, let's be honest. Does it feel a little like a cult? Yes, it does, because when you begin to work in ceremonial form, you're actually getting that same positive emotional energy that we associate with other things that get people irrationally happy and excited. It's not irrational. The magic is ceremony. Next slide. Ceremony is a purposeful ritual, a purposeful social ritual. Interaction to complete an element of work requiring sacrifice and rewarding participants with positive emotional energy. B17.
Ceremony.
We're already there. Ceremony defines culture. This is especially for you, Ari. Ari's written some of the world's best business books that I've ever read anywhere. I was telling him earlier, I read them with a highlighter, and I go through each page. And in this one book on culture, he talks about something that's really profound. Right in his one chapter in one book. All your chapters are profound, but I'm going to pull out one. He's like, culture is really hard to change. And he says, I've discovered in the deli that it takes like 3 years to have a change really go through. And he's like, you know what that maps to? The turnover rate in the deli. When I turn over enough people, the change goes through. And he even points out, although he doesn't point it out as brutally as you should, I don't know how Ford deals with this. Their cultures maybe don't change over for 20 to 40 years. You know the trend that's going on right now in the biggest companies? If you looked at like who was on the S&P 500 in 2000, half of them are out of business. That's how they deal with change right now. They go out of business. Whatever, who paid attention to the big one last week? Yahoo. This company had more capital than like every company in Michigan combined at one point in time. And they're out of business today. They couldn't change their culture. But ceremony defines culture. This is getting really interesting suddenly. So when you start to read books that are out there on business, and I list 4 up here, here's Ari's at the bottom, specifically his chapter on culture you have to read. Joy Incorporated, it's full of ceremonies. If you know what to look for and how to pull it out, it's full of ceremonies. They're literally ceremonies. You can write them down and begin to do them. Now when you begin to do them, you have to continually ask the 4 questions. Remember? Is it have purpose? Am I doing purposeful work? Is it a social ritual? Is it worth the sacrifice? And I have to ask everyone at the end, did you receive positive emotional energy? If they didn't, you may need to evolve the ceremony. You may have the wrong people in the ceremony. Often you have 2 or 3 ceremonies together that should be pulled apart, called like the weekly status meeting. In Extreme Programming Explained, although Kent Beck did not realize it at the time, he described programming as ceremony. And it changes everything for those inclined to do it. In Team of Teams, General McChrystal describes a ceremony he built in the first round of fighting Al-Qaeda in Iraq. He built a ceremony and he answered a question that was really profound. How big can a ceremony scale for sharing key information in a theater of battle? The answer was, by people opting in each day to his daily ceremony, it scaled to over 10,000 people. He had an extremely powerful ceremony. We defeated Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And then we sent him home and we blew apart the ceremony, and now here we are today. General McChrystal probably back in Iraq.
No, I just to interrupt to support what you're saying, but I actually spoke at a conference that he spoke at, and this is about a year and 2 months ago, and he keynoted on the first day, and I keynoted on the second day, right? So I go in there, and I'm, me, and I'm the anarchist, and and I'm like, okay, well, I'll learn from everybody. I'm not into the military, but I'm going to learn from this guy. So basically, he got up and in essence said exactly the same things about leadership that we see. And he actually specifically said that the old model of leadership is finished and it doesn't work. And he goes, my new metaphor for leadership is gardening. So he actually is not back in Iraq. And I said, I went up to him at the end and I said, this is super interesting, but I'm an anarchist and a pacifist in the food business, but you and I have ended up at exactly the same point. And he said, well, I'm not an anarchist, but I've become a pacifist.
Yeah.
So it's pretty interesting.
Very powerful. And there's a reason your books are next to each other on the slide.
I'm gonna take a picture. I'm gonna send it to Vern Harnish, who ran the conference. Hold that slide.
When you read Ari's books, you'll hear him use a word. It's a very powerful word that makes total sense for Zingerman's. He uses the word recipes. What is a recipe? It's a defined procedure they've done multiple times that they know delivers success. Successful outcomes. That's the power of a ceremony that you share. Now, he didn't necessarily make all of his recipes designed to be social, but they have social interaction points, the key ones that are successful. And you'll see that. He has a little pamphlet, Bottom Line Change, which is full of ceremony for facilitating change. These things are out there, and you can pull them out of the books once you see what they are, and once you understand the power. And once you understand that the elements of ceremony that are actually, by the way, the title of the book is meant to be a little bit of a joke, a new approach. Ceremony is an approach that goes back like 4,000 years. Once you see it, the ceremonies that you see and understand and that have survived the test of time all contain elements that you can and should reuse. B17.
Ceremony.
Call and response, like one of hundreds of ceremonial elements. I facilitate a patient group, a patient advocacy group, and we light a candle at the beginning. And when we light a candle, I almost tear up. I'm like, I'm lighting the candle because there's hope. There's hope for a cure, right? Why did I add that ceremonial element? I'm like, it'll probably work. It's been around for thousands of years. Lighting fire will probably work. Test it. Does it give positive emotional energy to the team? If it does, reuse it. Next slide. So Peter Drucker, I don't think he actually said this, by the way, but it's something that he would be inclined to say. And he's been quoted as saying this multiple times this century. He's like, culture eats process for breakfast. What's he saying? And those of you who've been involved in big companies and in big project management offices, and there's thousands of binders filled with process that somebody wrote down, usually the project managers trying to do their best, but blinded by their participation in PMI to understand the power of ceremony. And they write out all of these processes, and then nobody really follows them. And people discover their own way to get work done. And if it's working for them and you're rewarding them, and depending on the key performance indicators you have, it's likely you're actually you're rewarding those and not the behaviors that you wrote down. This is why people fill out checklists after a project is done. Culture is the habits, what people just naturally do. And culture eats process for breakfast. Culture eats process for breakfast. But remember what I said about culture. Ceremony defines culture. If you can begin to take the work that your people are doing, understand it, move it into ceremony, and ask the 4 questions, specifically the positive emotional energy question, you can actually get them to tell you what they're really doing, and you can get them to build something that actually works for them. This is incredibly powerful. Next slide. So here's my quote. Note the subtle equating of Tom Meloche with Peter Drucker. The same headshot in black and white.
My God, you're better looking.
Tom's quote, ceremony eats culture for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Once you define the ceremonies at work and you teach the people involved in doing them that it's their responsibility to ask those questions. Am I doing purposeful work? Am I doing this in social ritual? Is it worth the sacrifice? And teaching them how to do those calculations. And then as they leave coming together in social work ritual going, did you leave with positive emotional energy? When you give the team control of those things, ceremony eats culture for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And you can actually do real change in less than a generation. You don't have to wait for all of the engineers to die before you change how you write software. Next slide. Look, ceremony is the easiest method to teach. This is, by the way, on your sheet. And I can't remember these words except on this slide. To teach, implement, maintain, replicate, and change essential procedures. Ceremony is the only tool I know works other than waiting for the staff to turn over, which strikes me as not the world's greatest answer. Right? Ari gets away with it.
Well, we have a lot of other.
Ford, right? Yahoo could not get away with it. And he has, by the way, read his books. He has tons of other rituals and ceremony that actually define change, which is why you change more rapidly than actually waiting for the staff to turn over. Because he's built ceremony. Next slide. Look, ceremony solves the change problem. And this is fundamental. This is the world we live in. It's when I teach Agile, I always teach the change problem. I was working down at USAA, helping them do like $1.5 billion worth of software development a year. 4,000 people running 200 teams at a time. George knows how crazy all of that actually is, and that we have way too many people than you need, right? And I would point out to USAA, who's been in business for 90 years, basically doing collision insurance as a primary revenue generator. And I would point out, this is why people don't always love you. I'm like, I think collisions go away in the next 15 years. Next year, Volvo has already said they're going to produce a car that basically refuses to get into accidents while you're driving. Just like, nah, I'm not going to slurve into the car, not going to drive into the car, not going to back up into the car. I'm just going to refuse. Right? The rest of Silicon Valley is trying to build cars that drive themselves. And your business that's been running and beautiful for 90 years, their business will disappear in terms of collision insurance as we know it in the next 15 years. Almost guaranteed. Ceremony solves the change problems. How do you change how your business operates? How do you change? Boeing stopped way too soon. Boeing built a ceremony to take off a B-17, but they should have built a ceremony to ideate on what might be the next aircraft. They should have built a ceremony to test that idea out in the marketplace. They should have built ceremonies for designing and engineering and testing and flying all aspects of their future aircraft. They stopped too soon. They stopped at one ceremony when actually they probably need like 1,000 across the enterprise. They stopped too soon. Why does Ari keep writing books? As you read additional books, he keeps on discovering and disclosing new ceremonies that are used to run the organization. Ceremony solves the change problem. Next slide. So I've written a very short book on ceremony. I've written a very short book. It's like 11,000 words. It's currently available on Amazon Kindle. I have not turned on the print option, although we will sometime soon, especially for you. She's like, I need to hand. I wrote a very short book again for executives. It's for 99 cents right now. It's my Leaders Connect book launch promotion. If you search on ceremony in Meloche, you'll find it. You can also go to ceremonialsystems.com that will forward you to my location. I have a question for you now. And I want you to just spend a few minutes before we break to talk to someone around you, or one or two, just for like 3 to 5 minutes, I'll give you the time, on something you could do that would be improved with ceremony. Something you could do that would be, could be, maybe, right? We can ask the 4 questions. Improved with ceremony, made better. And I'll throw out an example. When I was down in South Texas working with USAA, I met a wonderful family, and they belong to the Mormon religion. And I'm like, and I probably said something that no one else has ever heard as a Mormon. I'm like, awesome, can I come to church with you? Because I want to see your ceremony. And they're like, yes! And I asked, and I said, and I was sharing ceremony. It was actually with one of the best Agile coaches at USAA. And I'm like, and he's like, you have to understand, if your family is having problems, like personal family problems, and you go to the bishop and you ask for advice or counsel, the first thing the bishop will say is, are you doing the ceremonies? Mormons have the idea of a family night ceremony once a week. Turn off all the electronics, turn off all the distractions, turn off the TV, right? Nobody does anything else, and you come together as a family, and you pray for a little bit, a few minutes, and maybe read a chapter, a page or two of the Bible, but the point is to play games together as a family. It's family night. And there's several other ceremonies that they do. There's a reason why they're known as a family-oriented church. It's not accidental. It's ceremony. It's ceremony. So I'm going to ask you for a couple minutes, turn to someone around you, and think about something that you do, or your business does, or a coworker does that might be improved with ceremony. Remembering those 4 ideas: purposeful work, social ritual, worth the sacrifice, and gives positive emotional energy. And I'll check in like a minute or 2.
If you spend some time doing that, also going to take advantage of the 99 special, now's the time, because one of the things we do is put things off. Order the book now. Done, right? All right.
So do that right now. Turn to someone and find a ceremonial topic to discuss. Can you, who wants to call out a ceremony? Yeah, Lori.
With all due respect, the presidency of the United States.
Presidency is a ceremony?
Needs a ceremony.
Needs a ceremony.
Who is that guy?
A ceremony maybe for how you communicate. Other ceremonies that were discussed.
Impeachment.
Impeachment. So it turns out in government is full of ceremonies. And most people don't understand that. When I was raising my daughter, I was like, if you ever come home and Mom and I are dead, don't talk to the police. She's like, what? I'm like, call my dad, he's an attorney. Talk to him, we know you didn't kill us. The police don't know. And they have ceremonies to determine guilt that may or may not always really deliver justice. But for a justice system, justice is served simply by running the ceremony, which is not a bad system. It just doesn't always get only the guilty people in jail. Other ceremonies that you discussed that you could use, yeah?
Higher education in the classroom.
Higher education in the classroom. And now I'm going to grab Robert for a second. So when I visit Robert's class, and he's given me the privilege of speaking a couple times, when I visit your class, you do ceremony in your class. What are some of the ceremonies you do in your class?
Well, I start out with first of all, everybody sitting in a circle.
So the first thing is powerful ceremonial element. Move people from this setup to a circle.
It's like we did here. We moved the desks out, and everybody sits facing each other all class.
Right.
And then we always start with some kind of report. So they're checking in on an assignment they had, or they're checking in on a question that I might pose. So they go around in a circle. I call it sort of the method of council. It's a little bit like Native American ritual that I've adopted.
Right.
So that's one. And I end the same way with, what is your major action item from today? Not the learning thing, but what are you going to do for having sat here for 3 hours or an hour?
And when you have a guest speaker, and what do you have the students do for the guest speaker at the end?
Students go interview the guest speaker. So they go out and interview Ari, or they come to you and interview you in Ari's coffee shop. And then they do the interview. They do the interview in the class. So it's not a guest speaker lecturing the class, but it's an interview. And the students learn to interview.
Excellent. So what we see, and it's like a great example, is look, class is already ceremony. It starts at a certain time, it ends at a certain time, people line up, and there's a speaker. And it has horrible emotional energy for the participants. So I have one more question for you. What's some of the feedback you get from your students who take your class compared to the other classes that are more standard ritual form?
Of course, the university's idea of ritual is what's your number, right? 4.8, 4.6, whatever. But you know, the students really like it. They're a little freaked out at first, and they're not used to it, and it's really hard to pull them into the circle, especially the students who are not used to being there. And you know, the toughest ones are the kids from disadvantaged environments, many of whom are athletes. So they don't want to come into the circle. They want to sit on the edge. They want to sit on the outside. And so that over 13 weeks, it's pulling them in and getting them actively engaged, and they love that at the end.
Awesome. Which leads to a point that I don't actually make in the first book, but I'll make more in the second book. By the way, there'll be a second book called, by the way, Positive Emotional Energy, how you structure an organization to make sure you're delivering it. But ceremony never exists by itself. Ceremony exists in a set of interaction ritual chains. So you get positive emotional energy not just from what you're doing today, but from how you got positive emotional energy from that social ritual in the past. So when someone's doing this new for the first time they do it, the answer may not be that this is working for me. It might be like, I feel awkward and I'm quiet. You'll have to do ceremony that you know works, or you have an idea works, multiple times to get it so that they're in that ritual chain, and that you'll begin to see the full impact of the ceremony. And there's a wonderful book. It's like academic. It's listed in the back of my book called Interaction Ritual Chains. It's really a profound book for me in understanding emotional energy with respect to rituals. And he points out in the book, he studied all sorts of things, microsociology. He's like, this is one of the reasons why it's so hard to break the habit of smoking. Because when you learned to smoke, it was often with other teenagers in a smoking ceremony that you did that bonded yourself to them emotionally, bonded yourselves together, set you apart. You did outside, now you do it in secret, which makes it, by the way, even more powerful of a ceremony. And then later when you're smoking even by yourself, you're still receiving energy from those past ritual experiences. That's why many of you, if you were raised attending some sort of religious tradition that was ceremonial as a youth, and maybe you stopped doing it in your 30s, in your 50s, you'll be drawn back to it in some way. Whether or not you accept that or express it in another way, there's positive emotional energy as you go through the process of life that pulled out of those rituals that you did at a younger age. And that's what we get out of ceremony. Other ceremonies that people thought of. Yeah?
Well, I just want to touch on what you're saying right now. And I have to leave in a little bit to go to another meeting, so I'm jumping in here if it is even a little Q&A beforehand. You're talking about smoking, you know, and I just see this as a really extremely powerful tool that can be used, you know, for good and evil. And it's not so much the black and white of that, but that that it can be ambiguous, like you mentioned the Mormon. It could be, I don't know, Mormon, but some religious context could be a way to entrench, a male-dominated culture on other people and family, etc. So even in the business, was this thing a call? Is it to advantage the people who are running the profits versus the other people? I mean, do you address?
Yeah, what I say, this is a great question. So the question is really around, this is such a powerful technique that it clearly could be used for good or for evil.
For manipulation, certainly.
For manipulation. And I'm like, look, people are doing ceremony anyway in your business. They're just doing bad ceremony and they're not getting a positive emotional energy from it. If you're when people come together and do purposeful work, and they do it in ritual forms, and they do it socially, they like it. Let's at least have people like their work. Let's at least affirm their humanity. Right? It's up to you, as the person who helps design and unleash the ceremonies, to hold your ambitions in check. Right? Now those who raise their hands about Menlo, how many of you have left Menlo? Yeah, they've all gone. Right? They've gone on to other things. But that experience there can still be thought of as powerful, especially if you understand it in this context. That this is what you were experiencing, and this is what you felt, and now you could go take it and make a meeting you attended in a giant bureaucracy more fulfilling. That's the goal of this. Look, it's going on already. It's how your brain naturally works. Let's get more positive emotional energy out of how we work. Right? Hold your own ambitions in check to not abuse it. Yeah, Lori.
Doesn't this really change who needs to be CEO?
Doesn't this really change who needs to be CEO? So, yes. In this book, this little book, is actually, so it's like, how many words? Is it 10,000 words? It's actually part of like a 150,000 word book I was writing on a new way to think strategically about how you organize everything in an organization, that I realized in the process of writing, nobody actually wants to read that book. But this was one idea in it that I pulled out. But you are correct. If you understand this idea profoundly, it changes the whole nature of how you build and scale an enterprise. And specifically, if you're small, it's easy. You can do this all the way up. Somewhere around 100, 150 people, you actually need a different strategy to truly scale this organization and take it with you. It was too much to talk about and sell. So for my giant bureaucracies, I had to be happy focusing on, can we make a better meeting? Well, I'm in the giant bureaucracy.
Tom, I'm going to kick off the question and answer by standing and asking you a question, but I'm going to do something a little bit different. You always challenge me. And that is, if you have a question, please get up, come over here, and we're going to have you take the mic and ask a question, because I'm really troubled by questions from an audience, very unintimate. And so I like the idea of looking each other in the eye, asking a question, and listening. Listening is a big thing. And so I'm going to start a question about digital, okay? Digital ceremony. There's a lot of us that belong to groups or interact with people online. I just started a group, which I'd like to invite all of you to do it for men over 55. It's called Men in Transition, and it's about men's health for men over 55. And I'm trying to create rituals in a Facebook group. So could you give me some ideas about ritual and when people work in virtual environments, because they are isolated? And if you have a question, come stand over here. We're going to let you come up next, okay?
So ritual, by the way, is something you can do by yourself, right? That's why I put it in the context of social ritual. I work with small businesses where everybody is not co-located, and so and they want to do ceremony. So I'm like, you can actually do ceremony over a conference call, over a telephone. It does require, though, because there's an idea of social entrainment, that you both be there temporally at the same time. You actually have to be communicating together. But if you're required, say you're working with a group of people who are dispersed and in 5 different locations, building ceremony for how you handle your phone interactions, or preferably, because everything you do to escalate, everything you do to go from I just sent you an email, which isn't really ceremony at all, to I'm doing a phone call where I have the potential for ceremony, to I'm doing a video conference call where I can see their face. Every time I get more feedback from the people, the more powerful the entrainment, the more powerful the social ceremony. But the book contains an example of something I call the heartbeat ceremony, something that literally every team and every organization should be running, was done and refined, the one in the book, with a team that's totally distributed. So they're doing it mainly on conference calls. And the heartbeat ceremony is coming together twice a week for like 10 minutes, the executives in this company, and reporting out loud to each other the key metrics that they're tracking and following. Now, why do they report these out loud together in social ceremony instead of just sending an email? Any guesses?
Positive emotional energy.
Positive emotional energy, and nobody really reads the emails. Right? So how do I know that the key people heard the message that I'm saying, the transparent thing? Like, this is our financials this week at this time. Because I literally said it out loud to them during the social ceremony. By the way, in the ceremony, a heartbeat ceremony is literally hearing the heartbeat. A key aspect of what makes that ceremony work is they're not allowed to discuss the answers. And if you make people come to report and talk about a key metric or indicator, and they have to have a solution to report the problem, you've just shut off communications. You've just made it dramatically harder to run your organization.
I think, are you waiting to ask a question?
Yep, real quick.
Say who you are.
I'm Kathleen Stevens.
Hi, Kathleen.
Hi there. So my question is, I am actually kind of restarting a new career path. So how do you assess that? How do you recommend that you can go to people's websites, different companies? How do you assess what kind of ceremony you're going to be walking into? I mean, I know that people ask about culture, and that's part of it, but how would you assess that when you are on a career search?
Wow, how would you assess that on a career search? That's a really wonderful question. There's really only one way, and it's not a natural part of what an interview process is. You actually have to watch them working. Right, so at the point, and this is something, so here's something that Menlo takes really seriously that employees often don't, but it's really great if you're not like having to jump from one. Menlo takes really seriously the first 30 days as a trial period. If you come in, after you go through their interview process, which is crazy in and of itself, it's very ceremonial and very intense, looking for social skills rather than technical skills. Then you come and work with the team. If after 30 days it isn't working, they ask you to leave. By the way, the team does that, the managers don't do that. My take is, if you might have to take the job, if you can't observe them working, and really take the trial period seriously on your part. If in your heart, you're 30 days in and you're like, I don't like how this feels and I don't think it's getting better, then leave and find another job. Right now, I don't know of a better shortcut, but take that really seriously. Ask yourself that positive emotional energy question while you're working there and get out. If you do that 3 times and find 3 different jobs to find the one that really gives you positive emotional energy, what an amazing investment in yourself. So that would be my suggestion.
Give me a good interview idea. I'd like to spend a day or 2 with you and your company first. That's great. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
I appreciate that.
Vic, let's go to the other side of this.
A good side. B17! All right. I love that.
By the way, that's really powerful and important.
That's all I wanted to say, really. My purpose is to help people. I want to rock the foundation, or that whole idea, that ideology of foundations. What I've seen is they take forever to help the people that they want to help. So, what do you recommend doing in terms of that?
So I'll give you just a great example from the early days of Menlo. In the early days of Menlo, because we had all of these ceremonial structures where you could come in, find work on the wall, pair up with somebody, sit down and do it. And it was literally, we saw the towers come down. So like everybody was out of work. We just had cards up on the wall and people would come in. A teacher came in one day and said, could you build me some software for the classroom? And we're like, yeah, there's no way you could afford us. And even if you could, we'd feel bad charging you what we do, because we want to work for George. Domino's had money. But we have all sorts of unemployed people coming in. Can we build it for you for free? And then the people who were coming in or working, it became this weird volunteer program where people would come in just for something to do during the day. They'd pull down the story cards off the wall. You might have been involved in doing the design for them. We had designers and then testers and project managers all participated in building this free software. And it occurred to me, because of the ceremonial forms, it was easier to volunteer at Menlo than it was at my church. Think about that for a moment. It was easier to volunteer at Menlo than it was at my church. And so when you experience that, what you can look for in helping foundations do things is ways to put in ceremonial forms to surface, drive, and give people opportunities to do something together. But it has to be purposeful, and it has to be social ritual, and it has to be worth the sacrifice, and it has to deliver positive emotional energy. And here's the thing. If you do those first three well, you almost are guaranteed to deliver positive emotional energy, and that allows it to become self-replicating. Make sense?
Absolutely.
Weird experience in Menlo.
I'm going to, is your dad still here?
I think he slid out.
Is he right out there? Or, so I was going to ask you and him, but I'm a big believer in a lot of what we do is the foundations are our family. And could you talk about how you learned this in your family?
What I mainly learned from my dad, and it doesn't appear to here, is radical skepticism. He's a lawyer, he's an engineer, and he embraces the side of his brain that's always saying, that probably could be better, or that's not being done all that well. And I've developed a personal philosophy sort of out of that, that really formed itself even better in the last 10 years, to temper that and to remind myself of my human condition. And my personal philosophy is, I'm wrong a lot about almost everything, almost all of the time. And when you say that out loud at first, it sounds like you're intentionally trying to be humble, or it's like, no, we actually call it humilitancy. Like, I'm militant in my fact that I really am wrong a lot about almost everything. It's actually the way human brains work. So I got really good from my father in understanding the utter wrongness about us. I see this mapping into things like, and George, you might appreciate this, I literally believe most places could reduce the cost of software by 99%. By 99%. We've demonstrated aspects of this for 20 years. And by the way, almost nobody does them. There's other reasons, there's other motivations that actually drive key aspects of our economy and how people work together. And so for me, I've been having to break the habit of just being ticked off about something like that, and to try to accept the reality of the human condition in myself and in others. And that's why I like looking for ways to get positive emotional energy out of work. But at the fundamental, I believe everything can be 99% better, like 99% better. And I wasn't joking when I said I read over 50 books to write this one. To me, I embrace that lifestyle of continuing learning. And that's something when I grew up, my dad was reading the Gulag Archipelago and other stuff. It was just something that you saw in the family that you did, is you read books and you discussed them. And Rich had this experience with his family. I remember you talking about everyone reading, Churchill's histories of the Second World War, right? You saw your parents doing that.
All right, well, Tom, it's been a delight to have you, and I'm serious about the ritual of ordering his book online. Think of it as a ceremony, a ritual, but the other thing besides ordering it is I really would encourage you as an author who's written a book on Amazon and Kindle, put reviews up.
Please.
Because they look at the number of reviews. I think what Dunry and I were over 30 at this point, and there's an algorithm that they use, and the more reviews you have, the better it's going to be. And I'm looking forward. Tom is also an amazing marketer, and he's written a book on Facebook. The use of
Facebook advertising. We're writing the third one right now.
And it's Facebook is absolutely, Marissa, another number of people in the room do this, but it's a platform for advertising that never existed before. And it's amazing. You can put something out for a few dollars, find out who's clicking on what, and keep changing it till you reach the audience. So if you want to reach all the people who are into ceremony in 10 miles of here.
Yeah, I'll be advertising to executives in Southeast Michigan who are interested in Agile. Probably a video, because you need video now to really reach people, that will introduce the book. Right, so you need, the video companies are essential now for Facebook advertising, make no mistake.
So this is another area of Tom's expertise and brilliance, and what's the name of the Facebook book?
Ultimate Guide to Facebook Advertising. That's actually published by Entrepreneur Press, and they're currently beating us up for being late for the 3rd edition. But I had to get this book out. Don't tell them.
Well, I appreciate you getting this book out and having the glory here of first a view of it, the first talk about it. So when this is a huge bestseller and people are talking about it in the same terms as other great business books, you said I was there when I was in the room where it happened.
This
right?
is launch day, which is why we have the 99-cent special for Leaders Connect.
That's right. And so please go out, and I also encourage people. We did a networking thing, and again, those people who raised their hand and looking for work, please seek them out. Those that are looking to hire people, there's lots of things that people are looking for. I'm looking for focus groups about my new book on career planning for couples. Last time, Mim and Joan talked about a refugee who they're trying to help get a job, and I think you get a lot of responses from that. So part of our ritual here at Leaders Connect is this is a community, and we try to stay connected. And I should really have a Leaders Connect group on Facebook. That will be doing that. Thank you, Tom.
So one last word. B17. Ceremony.
Feel free to grab more food and coffee, and we'll see you in September. Have a great summer.
Yeah, good to meet you. Hey. Okay, yeah. Yeah, it's funny talking about stories and cool if you got, and you definitely have